I do know it's 2022, believe me. That was a good one last night. 1 second. Okay. Well, welcome again to our 49th Catholic Educational Retreat. This year with the theme of Mystical Union with Mary. Today we begin our great conferences with Mr. Steve Ray. Steve is a convert, evangelist, author. After his conversion, he sold his business to follow his heart desire to write, evangelize, and produce Catholic films. He and his wife Janet lead pilgrimages to biblical lands in Lourdes, Fatima, and other holy places. He is the host of the popular award-winning film series on salvation history, The Footprints of God. Steve is also the author of the best-selling books, Crossing the Tiber, St. John's Gospel, and The Papacy. Steve and Janet are blessed with 3 daughters and a son and grandchildren. His topic for us is A Day in the Life of the Holy Family. Please welcome with me, Steve Ray.
Thank you, sister. No damage done. Thank you, sister. Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm happy to join you all for these couple days. And she said already, somebody asked, why do you wear a hat? So when I went to film my first movie in Israel, I didn't have my hat. And in the morning, I looked like this. And by the time I went to bed, I looked like a red beet. My wife bought me the hat and said, you're wearing this from now on, and I've been wearing it ever since. And it's also for the glare, though, for you. If I don't, the glare is going to be blinding. But also, I just got to liking it, and a lot of people don't know who I am if I don't have the hat on. We were in Rome just a couple days ago with a group. We went to the Oberammergau play. We had 60 people, and we went through there to Switzerland and through Italy and down to Rome. We were at St. Paul outside the walls, where St. Paul's bones were. And Cardinal Harvey, who is the cardinal priest of that church, those churches all have somebody who's a priest in charge. So he came out. I've never met him before, but he's a real gentleman. He used to be in charge of the household of John Paul II and Pope Benedict. He was in charge of their households. So when he came out, and somebody in our group said, Cardinal Harvey, hello. So he came over and just was chatting with our group. And then he looked at me very carefully, and I didn't have my hat on at the time. I don't know why I was holding it. And he says, put your hat on. And he says, you're Steve Ray. I didn't recognize you without your hat. I've heard all about you, he said. And then he said, I should genuflect to you. And my whole group was stunned. But this has kind of become my identification, and people know who I am because I wear the hat. Plus, I like wearing it, and if I don't wear it, it's like not wearing my watch. It's like, oh, I forgot something. I have to go back home and get it. And I've lost it a lot of times, so I do have a little computer chip in it, so if I lose it, I can find it. So, but that's the reason why. Now, they brought me here to talk about this because I love talking about the Holy Land and about the Bible. I'm a convert. I'm going to tell my conversion story tonight, how I came to discover the Catholic Church. And my family totally rejected us. That was the craziest thing we could ever do, go join that big cult. And from a Baptist beginning, it's a big difference. So I'm going to tell that story tonight. But since that time, I've always loved the Bible. My mom taught me to love the Bible when I was a kid. That was just something we learned. That was something that was the center of our home. We didn't have the Mass. We didn't have the devotions. We didn't have the rosary or anything like that. But we had the Bible, and that was my mom. That was the center of our life. So I've always loved the Bible. And when I became Catholic, I loved the Bible 10 times more, because all of a sudden so many pieces connected. Everything made sense now. The verses that used to be, you just didn't fit. You'd have to take them and set them on the shelf because it just didn't fit, Now as a Catholic, they all fit. So I really started to love the Bible even more as a Catholic, but as a Catholic, we went to the Holy Land for the first time. I never had a desire to before, but in 1995, we converted in 94. So in 1995, my wife and I said, let's go to the Holy Land. We've never been there before, and so we went with two of our kids. I cried my way through the whole place. Every single site I cried. In fact, I just finished my book, Upon This Rock, and they asked me at the primacy of Peter, where Jesus made Peter the rock, or he said, you're going to be the shepherd, feed my sheep. And they asked me to do the reading at Mass there. So I'm standing there, and this is called the Mensa Christi, where he fed them breakfast. I mean, I'm standing, the podium was here, the lectern, and actually the stone where Jesus had fed them, called the Mensa Christi, the table of the Lord, was right there. And I said, a reading from the first letter of Peter, and I got choked up and I couldn't read it. So I just said to the priest, give me a minute. And after 2 minutes, I sat down. I couldn't do it. And so they had to get somebody else to do the readings. But there was a real connection with me with the Holy Land because of my love of Scripture and of Jesus and my growing love for Mary, because at the time we didn't have much to do with Mary. That's what you folks did. You worshipped her, not us. You followed her and prayed to her. You forget all about Jesus. Mary is your go-to, and but over the growing process of becoming Catholic, we came to understand and love the teachings of Mary. And when I was in the Holy Land, we've been there over 180 times to Israel. That doesn't count Iraq and Jordan and Syria and places like that. That's just to the Holy Land. And we've led 80 groups. So 80 different times we've gone with buses with people all through the land. I've used the same guide every time. I interviewed them all, and I picked the best one and best Catholic guide in the country, and him and I have worked together for 20 years now. And so I got feeling like I got to know them. And then we got this idea. So I'm just laying a foundation for the rest of the talks I'm going to give for the time we're here. And in the year 2000, having gone to the Holy Land a couple times, and we actually went and rented a van once and drove our family for a month just visiting all these sites and exploring them all, I woke up at the year 2000, and it was pitch dark, and I sat up in bed like this, and I'd never thought of anything like this before, but it was in my mind, and it was clear as a bell, and I woke up my wife, Janet, wake up, quick, we have to do a 10-part video series on the history of salvation from a Catholic perspective. Wake up, Janet. She just thought the house was on fire, or I was having a heart attack. You shook me awake, scared me half to death like that, and 2 a.m. in the pitch dark to tell me we have to make a movie series on the history of salvation from... She said, Steve, you're just crazy. Go back to sleep. And then she says one last thing. We can't even take good pictures. How does God expect us to make movies? And she rolled over and went to sleep. I got up that night and I typed out the whole outline for a 10-part series. It was just there. I don't know how. I'm not going to be presumptuous. But I said it has to be from Abraham to Augustine. It has to be the whole sweep of the Old Testament. It has to be the whole sweep of the New and into the early church, because as a Protestant, I would have stopped with the book of Acts. But with the Catholic Church, now I realize that the Holy Spirit, the book of Acts doesn't have an ending. Did you know that? When you read it, it's kind of like you turn the page and go, well, where's the rest of this story? It ends with Paul in Rome. Well, okay, great. Then Paul went back out again, and Peter, what happened to Thomas and Bartholomew? So it's a really, when I get to heaven, I'm going to have to talk to Luke about how to end a book. But I realized that Acts can't have an ending because the book of Acts continues. It's the Acts of the Holy Spirit is what the title, and it continues all the way till today. So my series had to go beyond just the New Testament. So we went to Father. I typed the whole thing out that night, and then I went to Father Fessio, who's a founder of Ignatius Press. And I said, I already had a couple books with him. And so I called him. I said, I got an idea I want to do. And he said, okay, what is it? I said, well, I'd rather present it to you in person. He said, okay, we're having a board of directors meeting next week. Why don't you fly out and meet with the board and tell us what your idea is? I said, okay, good. So my wife and I flew out there, and we met with them. And they had, by the way, it was a lunch, and they had a bottle of red wine and a bottle of white wine. I was looking for those at the table today. I didn't see them, but I'm just kidding. And they had the white wine and the red wine. And I waited till they drank both bottles, and when they were both gone, then I told them my idea. So I told them that I want to do this whole story of salvation on video, starting with Adam and Eve, and it'll be mainly Abraham, and then Moses going through the wilderness of Sinai, and do the whole thing. And I explained it to him, and he says, he asked me 3 questions. Has it ever been done before? I said, no, never been done before. Not Jewish, Christian, Protestant, Catholic, nothing. I don't think anybody's done anything this sweeping. Because I wanted to have helicopter. Every time we go into a new site, I wanted it to come from the air with our own footage from helicopters. And it had to be fun for kids. I had to wrestle snakes. I fall in the mud. I'll explain that, how I explain the Immaculate Conception by falling into a mud puddle. So I gave him the whole idea. Has it been done before? No, it's never been done before. How much will it cost? I said, I talked to some friends who know video, because I don't. I've never done anything with video, so I don't know. But he told me it'd be over $2 million. He said, okay, 3rd question, how soon can you start? And he wired $50,000 into my checking account before I was home, and 6 weeks later we were flying all over Israel and Turkey and Italy and Egypt in helicopters, getting all of the aerial footage that we needed for the series. And then we came back home. Well, we're still I have one more to do. It's been a 20-year project. We started that in 2020. The second one we did is Mary, so I'm just going to show you this one, because this is all the places where Mary lived, all the places where the Bible mentions her, and I'm there, and I explain her whole life on location from there. So anyway, he gave us the money to do this, so we started doing it, and we've been filming these for 20 years now. We've got 9 done. We got 1 more to go, Doctors of the Church. We'll probably do that COVID slowed us down a little, but we'll probably do that one next year, the year after. So then people started watching these and saying, Steve, you make these movies, and you take us to the Holy Land and these places in the movies. Why don't you do it in person? If you take us in person, we'll go with you. So I'd never thought about that. So in 2005, I put on my website, Holy Land Pilgrimage with Steve and Janet Ray. Sold out in a couple weeks. So we said, let's do it again. So we started doing it again. Then somebody said, we went with you to Israel. Where are you going next? I said, Rome. So we made a pilgrimage to Rome. Then we're Fatima and Lourdes. And next thing you know, we're going to all these Catholic sites. So that's kind of the genesis of how this got started. But one of the things that I like to do, and I want to do today, is talk about a day in the life of the Holy Family. Tonight I'm going to give my conversion story. Tomorrow, the 2 sessions that I have, I think they're in the morning. I want to do those 2 sessions on the life of Mary. Just her life, from her birth. Actually, we're going to start with the prophecies from the Old Testament about her, and through her birth and her life, and how her life ended, which Catholics don't know much about that. They don't know what happened to Mary. Where did she die? Did she die, or did she just fall asleep? What happened? And so we're going to do, and I've done this for a seminarian group and also for sisters once. It took 4 hours to do it, but I'm going to squeeze it into 2 tomorrow. And then the next day, we will do the 12 unknown sorrows of Mary. So in other words, we have the 7 Dolorosas. And I know the sisters here, their name is the Sorrows of Mary, right? So I just, by walking in the land and reading the Bible and meditating on these things, I said to my wife, a lot of things that we call in Mary's life, even some of them, the joyous mysteries, were also sorrowful events. So I'm going to do that the 3rd day, break it down and go through we'll touch on the 7 devotions, the Dolorosa of Mary, but I want to bring out 12 other sorrows of Mary that nobody thinks about. Nobody even probably knows that they're sorrows. And then the 6th talk is kind of a wild card. I haven't decided what we'll do on that one yet. I might do a talk on St. Joseph, because if you want to understand Mary, it's good to understand the guy she lived with most of her life since she was 15 years old. Because you're certainly not going to understand me if you don't understand my wife too, or the other way around. So I thought maybe we could do Joseph, or I have some other options as well. But that's kind of outline what I'd like to do. So I'm not going to talk about so much the mystical Mary, the one that we see in artwork, where she's so beautiful. She has blonde hair. She's come right out of Sweden. And she has a little Swedish baby with her. And there's not a speck of dust on her feet. I'm going to talk about the real Mary, the real girl, and the woman of mystery. And I know why art portrays her the way they do. For example, when I take my groups to the Visitation in Israel, it's in a city called Ein Kerem. It's a Jewish town 4 miles west of Jerusalem. And Ein Kerem is where the Visitation took place. Do you know how far that was? I'm going to give you a little bit of my talk tomorrow, but when it says that Mary made haste to go visit her relative Elizabeth, how far did she go?
80 miles or something.
About 100 miles. Because it's 80 miles as a crow flies, but they didn't do that. They went into hill country of Judea. So it was, so she had to walk. How long would it take you to walk 100 miles? I mean, she was 15, so we'll give her a break, okay? She was 15, but how long would it take her to walk that far? So when we get to the site there's this beautiful mural in the Church of the Visitation, and Mary's coming up to Elizabeth, beautiful blue dress on, and these cute little sandals, and her hair is just right, and she's very pregnant. And I say to my group, do you think that's what Mary looked like when she arrived here? No, it's not what she looked like when she arrived here. First of all, she would have been walking without showers, and you usually had to join a caravan, which means you're walking behind 20 or 30 camels. And guess what your feet looked like by the time you arrived? Which is why the Bible talks 24 times about washing feet, because they didn't have clean sidewalks. They're always with animals. And I'll bring that up a couple times. I was raised on a farm, so I have a good sense of it. And also, she was very pregnant, but when Mary arrived there, she didn't look pregnant at all. It couldn't have been more than, it says she made haste. So let's say it took her 5 days to pack her little suitcase. And then she took 6 days to walk there. That's not even 2 weeks yet. How big was the baby in her womb? You'd need a microscope to see what was in her womb. That's so, but I understand why they make an image of her very pregnant, and why they make her, because she is the Immaculate Conception. She's the Queen of Heaven. She's the one without sin. She is the Virgin Mother. So the artwork shows her in this beautiful way. They exemplify, or they exaggerate the physical appearance to portray the inner qualities of Mary, which I understand, but also I think it's helpful for us to know who the real Mary was and what her life was really like. For example, Jesus on the cross, we see him on the cross, it does us a great disservice. Yes, we see him on the cross. And my grandson, we were at Mass Sunday, and he sat on my lap. He's 3 years old or 4 years old, and I can't keep track. I have 19 grandkids. And he was holding this. He says, "Papa, do you think it hurt?" This is during the Mass. Yes, it hurt. I didn't tell him to shut up. He's got good questions. I'm going to talk to him. Yes, I think it hurt. There's a nail here and a nail here and a nail there. But I said it was worse, because if you would have seen what he really looked like, you wouldn't be able to stand even looking at it, because it was not just 4 nails and a lance, but his whole body would look like was all ripped up, like Mel Gibson's movie. And he was totally naked on the cross. This is the way the Romans did it. I had people say, "You can't say that. Virgin Mary would have never let him hang on the cross naked." Well, Mary wasn't in charge. I've had people write to me and tell me I'm a heretic because I said that. But this is the degradation of Jesus on the cross. And most of our crucifixes, his loins are covered, and rightly so. I would not want to have a naked Jesus in front of the man. So rightly so, he's covered. And it looks like he's almost swooning on the cross. And there's no wounds, except if you go to Mexico or Spain. They really do it up in Mexico and Spain. You get a pretty good idea what he looked like on the cross. But my point is that in a way it does us a disservice seeing him like that on the cross, because we don't see the price that was really paid for our sin. We don't really see and have brought to our eyes how horrible it really was, what the cost of sin really is. That was that terrible, because sin is that terrible, that was the price he had to pay for it. And it does us a disservice to see him so pretty on the cross and resting almost. And I understand that too, because even though he's there, he's totally in charge. And in John's gospel, he says, "I will be raised up," and that is kingly terms. A king is the one raised up, and then all men will come to him, right? This is what happens to a king. And I will be raised up and draw all men to myself. And it's using royal terminology of a king taking his throne. Jesus is in complete control on the cross. He is like a king taking his place. To him, that was the most glorious moment for him, because he was proving demonstrating how much he loved us and how much he hated sin. That was the demonstration of it there. So he's in charge, and he's in control, and he's rise up like a king. But still, it does us a disservice in a way by not seeing the pain of the crucifixion. And I think it's the same with Mary. If we don't understand who the real girl was, and she was probably 15 years old when the angel came to her. She wasn't just graduated from university and got her PhD or something. They were very different the way they lived back then. And so Mary would have been just a young girl, and very different than I think that we think of her and see her. So I'm hoping today, based on, well, how do I know these things about Mary? Well, first of all, studying Scripture. Scripture, there's a lot of hints. There's a lot of information about what life was like back in those days, even from the Old Testament and the New Testament. And I know Catholics don't like the Old Testament so much. It's way too big and it has a lot of long names in it. But if you study the Old Testament, there's a lot of good information about how they lived and what their life was like in their relationship to their God and Yahweh, who had brought them out of Egypt. Also by looking at archaeology, because you have all of these coins and pottery and the way they lived. It's the more and more they dig over there, the more we get a good picture of what daily life was like. Also by reading history, because the Bible's not the only book that talks about those. There's a lot of Roman history, and Josephus wrote about. So when you put all of this, plus I have a very vivid imagination, an insatiable curiosity. My father refused to give me a television when I was a boy, and he read books to me, and he taught me to be curious about everything, and that's what we did with our kids too, no television. Even my grandkids today have no television or iPhones. Not until they're 18 do they get a phone. They read books to each other. Can you imagine that strange concept? So anyway, so if you study all those different aspects, you can come up with a pretty good idea of who that, I think the Pope's calling him. I think that you can come up with a pretty good idea. Plus, if you walk around the land and you walk from the well in Nazareth to where they lived, we just think Mary turned on the water faucet. She lived in a cave. We'll get to that in a minute. And when you start walking that distance and see what Mary spent most of her life doing menial tasks and dealing, and their lives are overshadowed by the Romans. This like a tyrannical government overshadowing them, everything they did, and took their taxes away. And by the way, I have at home I have a whole museum of stuff. I can't bring it all with me, but I just got this denarius. This is a coin Mary would have had in her hand many, many times. This is a silver denarius, 1 day's labor. When Joseph and Jesus went to work for a day, they came home with one of these in the palm of their hand and gave it to Mary. She probably took care of the finances. So, but I'll show you this later, but it's a kind of the coin, that silver denarius that Jesus talked about, and this is what they used to go shopping and to buy things and finance a trip to Egypt and so on. So I want to start out, jump into the story of the daily life. Now, my favorite place to do this is not in Beaverton, Oregon. My favorite place to do this talk is at the Church of the Holy Family, which is just behind the Basilica of the Annunciation in Nazareth. And I've given this talk probably 60 or 80 times in that spot. When I take the groups there, I said, we're going to take you down now into the Church of the Holy Family, and we're going to go down into the grotto where they lived. And this is the 30 silent years. All that we read in the New Testament about Jesus and Mary pretty much takes 3 years' time. But in this cave, they lived there for 30 years, 10 times longer. They lived in this cave, which we don't know much about, except that Jesus stayed behind in the temple. And they had to go find him. By the way, can you imagine losing the Son of God? We'll talk more about that tomorrow when we go through the whole life of Mary. Oh, Joseph, we lost God's son. What are we going to do? If you lose a kid in a grocery store or something for 2 minutes, you panic. And just imagine this. Anyway, so I love giving this talk right in front of the church where the cave is, where the Holy Family lived for 30 years, which we don't know anything about, but I try to help people understand what their daily life was like. So they lived in a cave. Nazareth didn't have houses like we know of today, and they lived in caves. There's been 25 caves roughly identified there. When you go, you can see into the street level of Nazareth in certain places. You can see where Jesus played when he was a little boy on these streets down here. You can see the archaeology of it. And people say, well, you say they lived in caves. Well, what about the Holy House of Loretto? Well, we just drove past that 2 weeks ago, and I've taken groups there too. The Holy House of Loretto does not claim to be a whole house. When you go, how many have been to the Holy House of Loretto? Well, it's inside of a big church. You go inside a huge church, and in there's this little place where you get in line and you go in, and it's like a little house made of stone, and that's the Holy House of Loretto. And interestingly enough, at the Church of the Annunciation in Nazareth, we'll talk more about this tomorrow, on the altar where the angel met Mary there at that spot, it says the Word became flesh here. Is that you said that? Yeah. Very good. The Word became flesh here. Hic in Latin, the word hic. In the Holy House of Loretto, the altar says the same thing. The Word became flesh here because the claim is that the house where they lived in was brought here, so it was here that it happened too. So you can say it in both places. But that Holy House of Loretto, the whole thing is not the house. They built it that way, but the only stones that came from Nazareth are the ones along the base, pretty much an L shape around the base. And so the way I explain that is if you lived in a cave and you've got a big front entrance to the cave, you're not just going to leave the front entrance open. You're going to build, Joseph would have built a facade. They built like a brick wall or a stone wall with a door in it so that you entered into the cave, you could shut the door. Even if you go to the church of the angels where the shepherds came to announce to the when the angels came to announce to the shepherds about the birth of Christ, that cave now where we have Mass, it'll hold 100 people plus, we have Mass in there, that cave now has a stone entrance with a door in it. So the Holy House of Loretto would have been, in my estimation, and I think a lot of scholars would agree with me, is that it was the part of in front of the cave that Joseph built, and that's what was moved over there. And so it is part of the house, but it was the front facade of the cave. Now, Nazareth is a small podunk little village off the main road. It's not important. You never heard of it in the Old Testament. It's never mentioned. It's kind of off on the side. No main road goes through it. And it's just made of 25 caves of families, so probably no more than 250 people lived in this little village. Only had one water source, which was a 15-minute walk away. And you had 250 people living in this isolated little village. You could go to Cana. I've run everywhere in Israel. I've run from Nazareth over the hill down to Cana and back to see how far it would be and to where Jesus worked in Sepphoris and up Mount Transfiguration, all these places, which is why you'll see me limping around here now because my knees are shot and I just had a procedure and I'll probably have to have them replaced next year. So because it's great to run, but if you do it your whole life, it catches up with you in the end. So this little village is, and people back then knew everything about everybody. So, for example, when Mary, the angel tells her, Mary, you're going to have a baby. And, well, how's this going to be? I don't know a man. More on that all tomorrow. But everybody's going to find out that she's pregnant and she hasn't moved in with Joseph yet. And this is a problem. So if I was Mary, I would have said, dear angel, would you do me a favor? Thank you for telling me this good news, but would you tell everybody else in Nazareth what you just told me? And let them know. Because even today, my friend lives in Nazareth. He's my best friend in Israel. He's our guide, named Amr Shahada, lives in Nazareth. And it's now 95,000 people live there. And everybody still knows everything about everybody. One day, his phone was ringing off the hook, his cell phone. And I said, Amr, what in the world's going on? He said, I ordered a new red car for my wife yesterday after we went on a tour. He went down and I ordered the red car. And everybody's calling me to congratulate me on the new car, but I don't tell anybody that I bought it and I haven't gotten it yet. But everybody in Nazareth already knows that I ordered the red car. So this is the kind of atmosphere that you have. It's a very Jewish village. Everybody is close. Everybody knows one another and they know everything about everybody else. And they are living together in this very close-knit society. Now, when they wake up in the morning, it's not with their Apple iPhone or something, it's the neighbor's rooster. And they wake up. Who's the first one to get up, do you think? Mary. She gets up and starts to take care of her guys. But here's a question I like to ask people when I'm there. And it's a little bit earthy, I'm sorry, but it's the way it is. What do you think as the first thing the Holy Family did when they got up in the morning? Everybody says, you got it, but everybody says, pray. When they woke up in the morning, the Holy Family prayed. Well, yes, they did, but not before they do what you do first thing when you wake up in the morning. You go use the restroom. Now you're living, and the question is, why do we not think of the Holy Family like that? We kind of put them 3 feet off the ground, that they're floating 3 feet off the ground, and they don't have any bodily functions like the rest of us. They don't have a real life like the rest of us do, which they certainly did. Now, You live in a cave, there's no running water, there's no electricity, there's no plumbing, there's no refrigerator, blow dryers, toothbrushes. Where do you go to the bathroom? Everybody's thinking, well, there's public restrooms downtown Nazareth. You just came up to my friend William's mother. I don't remember. Detheridge. And she said, I told her about this. She says, where we come from in Mexico, people still live like that, where they have to go outside and find a place to go. And I've been to the Philippines and India many times, and this is the way people live. We live in a very unusual, according to human history, the bunch of us here live in very unusual circumstances. I would be interested just to know how many toilets there are in this whole facility. Everybody has their own. Nobody gets up and goes anywhere in the middle of the night. You have your own little toilet right there. But the Holy Family didn't have that. They had to go outside somewhere, and they had to find a place to go. And that includes Mary. And they would have to find a place to use the toilet. And in the book of Deuteronomy, it says, your God is a holy God. Therefore, when you squat, or whatever, it's called stepping aside. That's the polite way the Bible says you step aside to use the restroom, toilet, whatever you want to call it there. You had to dig and bury it, kind of like a cat does. And because the Lord your God is a holy God, and he doesn't want to walk through your land if it's not clean. Very interesting. See, that's why I mean the Bible's such an earthy book, and you can learn about Mary's life by reading the law, the Mosaic law, what it was like, how the Jews lived, how they God's commands to them. So when they take care of that business, they come back in, and then they pray. Yes, of course they do. Prayer was their whole life. They had a rhythm of prayer, I guess you could call it. Just like, Father, every day you pray prayers in the morning, right? And then at noon, and you have the night prayers. And there's a whole office of readings that the priests and the religious do. All of us don't do it so much, but we could. But that's required of them, and they do these readings. And you could call it the cycle or the whole life of prayer, practicing the presence of God, always praying. And that's what they were like. It wasn't just like they prayed. Yes, they did, just like you and I pray. But our whole life, when you get to know the Lord and you get to know the Catholic faith and you become intimate with it, your whole life becomes a life of prayer. Everything you do, in a sense, is a prayer. Everything you do is for God. And even if it's subconscious, you're requesting his help and knowing that he's going to be there to assist you. One of the most popular books ever written is called Practicing the Presence of God. That you, every day, moment by moment, you practice his presence. You remember, he's right here now with me. I can ask him anything, and it becomes part of the whole rhythm of your life. But they did have specific prayers that they had, the Jews, just like the priests and the religious do, where they have to pray these certain readings from the scriptures, and they had certain prayers that they prayed, and that's what the Holy Family would have done. So after their prayers, what would they do? Mary would make food for them. What kind of food would the Holy Family eat? There's no McDonald's down the road. They don't have the fancy stuff we do. It's very simple diet, very simple life. They would have things like lentils and grains. You would make wheat, you would make bread. What would you make bread out of? There was basically two kinds of grain at the time, barley and wheat. Wheat was for the rich people. Wheat was expensive. This is why I remember the poor boy who came and brought the loaves to Jesus. What were they made of? Barley. They were barley loaves. They were for the poor. You fed animals barley. Only the rich could have the fine wheat. So even now when you read the Bible and you hear of wheat or barley, it means a lot more, realizing that wheat was a very special commodity. And the Eucharist has to be made out of wheat because it's an elegant, just like the chalice has to be made out of gold, because this is signifying the elegance of this meal that we partake of. So they didn't eat much meat because meat was expensive. It's getting more expensive now. Because if you had a lamb, sometimes you would hear about the fatted lamb. Or Abraham, when the 3 visitors came to him, they went out and got the fatted calf. That was extremely luxurious to do. Because animals were how you measured your wealth. Pecuniary means money, right? That comes from the word cow. How many cows you had was your pecuniary how rich you were. If you go out and kill the fatted calf, could just drop. If you go out and kill the fatted calf or the lamb and offer it for somebody for a big meal, you ate the meat of that lamb once, but you have now eliminated all the milk that lamb is going to produce over the next years, all the wool it's going to produce over the next years, all the other baby lambs it's going to produce over the next years. So you really just shot yourself in the foot, and you don't eat very much of that. You use the lambs and the goats for milk and wool and new baby goats, and you use it for trading with people for things. You don't eat them under very special conditions. So when Abraham offered, he told Sarah, run and get this, run and do this, get the fatted calf. Go, that he was doing that. What was so special about that? Who were those three men? I like to say, put it this way. I just finished a commentary on the book of Genesis. It's being published by Ignatius Press next year. It's 550 pages, and I've spent a lot of time on that. I'd like to ask a riddle. When was the only time in the Bible we see God walking on earth with all 6 feet? When is the only time we see in the Bible God walking on the earth with all 6 feet? That when those three messengers came to Abraham, and he addressed them, the three, singularly as Lord. And I have good reliability on this. The whole Eastern tradition of the church, they have Rublev, the Russian, painted one of the most famous icons ever painted, and it's called the Trinity. It's the three they're eating with Abraham and Sarah providing them the food. It's called the Holy Trinity. And both Augustine and Ambrose, two great doctors of the church, said when we read this passage, he said, we're walking through very deep waters and seeing the mystery of the Trinity. And there were three. One of them left and went back to heaven. The other two went down to Sodom. And it said, then Yahweh on the earth called down fire from Yahweh in heaven. So the whole implication that you had, this is a mystery of the Trinity there. And what did he do? He didn't skimp. Go get the skinny lamb. Let's get rid of that one. Didn't we have some bread left over from yesterday or the day before? Did you keep it? So can you still squeeze it? It's not too hard. So, but he made the fatted calf. And then when Jesus, I'm off track here, but it's fun talking about these things. When Jesus then, in John chapter 8 and 10, when the Jews are coming after him, they said, we're the sons of Abraham. And he said, if you were the sons of Abraham, you would do what Abraham did for me. And they said, you're not even 50 years old, and you know Abraham. And Jesus said, before Abraham, I am, which is the name of God. Before Abraham was, I am. In other words, look how you're treating me. If you say you're the sons of Abraham, then why don't you treat me like Abraham did? And what is he talking about? Genesis 18, when he came there and Abraham rushed, he said. And if you look at that passage, rushed and hurried and ran about 6 or 8 times in that short few verses. He hurried to do this. He told Sarah to rush and do that and get the calf. And quickly he did this and quickly he did that. And Jesus says to the Jews, you didn't do that for me. You tried to kill me. If you're the sons of Abraham, then why don't you do what your father Abraham did? So the animals that they would eat were very rare, but they would have eggs, right? Didn't Jesus say, if your son asks you for an egg, will you give him a serpent? There was chickens, because it says, how often as a mother hen would I have gathered you under my wings? So they would have eggs, and they would eat chicken at times. But again, not a lot. Here's a funny one. They would eat grasshoppers and sparrows. Who said, ooh? In Leviticus 11, verse 22, the Jews have a very limited diet, very restricted. They can only eat things that come out of the sea that have scales and fins. They can't have catfish, lobster, clams, this wonderful stuff that I love. One of my favorite things in Rome is to get the fruta di mare, the fruit of the sea, with linguine. But they can't eat any of that stuff. They can only eat a very limited diet. And Leviticus 11:22 says that what they can eat, you can't eat any of the creepy, crawly things upon the face of the earth except those that hop with their back legs, crickets, grasshoppers, and locusts. And guess what? John the Baptist ate them. People said it's strange. No, it was part of their diet. That's just what it's very high in protein, and they're everywhere. One time we were down in the Jordan Valley, and I was explaining the diet and reading this passage about grasshoppers, and I was jokingly, I said to everybody, and if anybody finds a grasshopper, I'll eat it. And 4 smart Alecks, I don't remember their names, they went out and found a 4-inch wiggly grasshopper and brought it back to me and said, my wife says, what are you going to do now, Steve? I said, I love living the Bible in the Holy Land. I told him I would. I chucked him in and chewed him up and swallowed him. But this is, and he was kicking, trying to get out. I had to, I just said, I'll only do it once. Once was enough. But they ate these kind of things. Of course, I think they would fry them and put them in a salad, like powdered, but also sparrows. This is a little off track, but the house sparrows that you see out here, the ones with a little black bib, they originally come from the whole area of the Middle East. They didn't come from here. They're not indigenous to our country. They came from the Middle East. And when Jesus said as a parable, don't you buy 2 sparrows for a penny, or 3 sparrows, 5 sparrows for 2 pennies? My thought was, why would they buy sparrows to begin with? It's like a common thing. Everybody buys sparrows, 2 for a penny. Why would anybody want to buy a sparrow? The kids would trap them with little snares and sell them because they have these little breast muscles in there, and you could flavor food with it. And I found out that even today, those house sparrows are part of the kosher diet of Jews. And I've seen even in pictures of whole strings of those where they're selling them. So, but then there's lots of grains and nuts and fruits and dates and pomegranates. Even pomegranates were woven into the curtains of the temple out in the wilderness of Sinai. The curtains were very thick, but they had pomegranates in them. It was a very common food, and it's delicious when you get a pomegranate drink when we're over there. But these are the kind of simple foods that they ate, things that they could grow themselves or barter with people that would come through. Sometimes if they did come through Nazareth, even though it was, but then when they'd go to Jerusalem, just imagine if you live in this little town, you all of a sudden now you come down and there's Jerusalem. And Jerusalem, that Temple Mount is 30 football fields in size, the Temple Mount. And the temple was probably 10 stories high, covered with gold. Can you imagine what it would look like from people that just live in a little podunk place, live in caves, very agrarian, and all of a sudden you come over the hill and there's Jerusalem, glistening in the gold. It must have been fantastic. It must have been glorious. So that's what they would eat. So Mary would get the fire going. There's a fire in the cave, and she'd cook the food for them and get them ready to eat. And then they would eat, and then she'd have to send them off to work. Now, if you live in a village with 25 caves, where do you go to work? Anybody that knows business or does sales knows that in order to have work, you have to have a sales base. You have to have somebody to sell things to. And if you're only in a town of 25 caves, you go next door, Josiah, I'm a carpenter. No, Joseph, you fixed everything 6 months ago. There's nothing here to do. What are you going to do for a living? What's Joseph going to do for a living? And let's talk about first what the word carpenter means, because we have preconceived ideas in our mind what a carpenter is somebody who has a lathe and a bandsaw, and they make fine cabinetry. And even in Mel Gibson's movie, he had a little fun with this. I don't know if you noticed it or not, where he made a table for his mom. But it was the kind of table that you sit at, like we have here. They didn't have these kind of tables. The tables then were on the ground, and you would recline at the table. So what we would be doing here is these tables would be down, and the food would be on the table, and all of us would leaning on one elbow, and our feet would be radiating out from the table, and we would be reaching for food. You didn't have silverware. So even today when you eat with the Arabs, they will take a piece of pita bread, and they will have a plate in the middle, and you scoop and you eat it with the pita bread, and everybody shares together eating the food. So that's how they would have eaten back then. And this Joseph, I'm making this table as kind of a pun or a joke that Mel Gibson put in there, that he'd made this for his mom, because he didn't make tables like that, and that's not what carpenters did. Carpenter is the Greek word tekton, T-E-K-T-O-N. T-E-K-T-O-N, tekton, and it means one who works with hard materials. As simple as that. It doesn't mean a craftsman. It more means a day laborer, a redneck. How do you get to become a redneck? You work all day out in the sun, and at the end of the day, the sun makes you have a red neck. That's where it comes from, redneck. I love finding out where words come from. So Jesus and Joseph were basically rednecks. They worked outside. They worked with their hands. And they were calloused hands, dark skin, because they would have, what most of us think is that he was a stonemason. Because in Nazareth, they don't have much wood. And you build with what you have. In Capernaum, you built with basalt rock. It's the black volcanic rock. It's everywhere. And all the houses in Capernaum are built out of basalt rock. And in Nazareth, you had caves. You dug holes in the side, you had caves. You don't have much wood. So you built with the material you had at hand. Very thrifty, practical people. But what they do have in Nazareth is stone. Even today, when I drive around Nazareth or out past Nazareth, I always point out to people, see that quarry over there? They're quarrying Jerusalem limestone. They're still doing it now, 2,000 years later. And there's a law in Jerusalem that every building has to be made with Jerusalem limestone. You can't just say, well, I want to have a pink facade. No, you can't do that. It has to be made of Jerusalem limestone. So when you look at a distance, Jerusalem is beautiful because it's all uniform in these beautiful different shades of this Jerusalem limestone. So it all comes from most of it around the area of Nazareth. So what do you think Joseph and Jesus did? Well, about an hour walk from Nazareth, there is a city called Sepphoris. And I've run to Sepphoris and back a couple times. And I think I tried to follow the path Jesus would have gone with Joseph every morning to work. So they get up in the morning. Mary packs him a bag lunch, probably the same thing the poor boy had when Andrew found him and brought him to Jesus. And it was barley loaves and smoked fish, because you can't keep a fish. It's going to smell really bad the next day. Even if you put it in your refrigerator now, you've got to eat it pretty quick or you got to throw it away. But if you smoke it or salt it, you can keep it for a long time. That was done in Magdala, by the way. That was the big processing plant for fish. And it was even the smoked fish from Magdala was so famous, it's even mentioned in writings from Rome that they had the fish from Magdala. So Mary would pack them a little bag lunch wrapped in leather or something of barley bread and smoked fish. And they would go off to work. About an hour walk. I know it's about an hour walk because it took me a half an hour to run there and a half an hour to run back, and they weren't in as big a hurry as I was, so they were walking. And they're now going to a city called Sepphoris, and I don't have proof of this, but this is very logical because you go where the work is. There was no work anywhere around. That is a huge construction site going on during the boyhood years of Jesus. The Romans were building a huge capital city, and they were quarrying that Jerusalem limestone to build this city of Sepphoris, and the Jews call it Zippori. And they were building, the streets are all made out of stone, the walls, the theater, all of this. And when I take our groups there, we don't do this every time, but we do a part called Holy Land Part 2 where we do all new sites. I always say when you see these stones there, realize that Joseph and Jesus may have quarried them and put them in place because they worked here. This is where they worked. And that stone right there, Jesus may have quarried that out of the hillside and shaped it. Because when I see them coming to work, the union boss points to a pile of rocks that have just been brought in. And they give Jesus and Joseph a hammer and a chisel each, and they point to the rocks, and they know exactly what they have to do. They have to go there, chink, 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 all day long, chipping those. They didn't have the hydraulic equipment we have today. They did it all by hand with chisels and hammers. One time I had a rock from Caesarea Philippi. I brought home a big one because I was going to break it up and give it to people. Say this came from where Jesus said, "You were rocking on this rock, I'll build my church." This is a piece that came off that big rock. And so I went home and I put it on my workbench and I took the hammer and went whack, and it shattered. But I also had 6 places where my hand was bleeding. Those shards of rock just hit my hand, and I was bleeding all over the place. Jesus and Joseph are out there all day long chipping at rocks with no safety goggles, no OSHA requirements. Out in the sun, they had brown faces, brown dark eyes, brown faces. And if you said, "Show us your hands," you would have seen scarred, calloused hands. Joseph and Jesus were manly men, working 12 hours a day, chopping, cutting rock, quarrying rock, carrying rock, stacking it up on the walls, whatever. Don't know exactly what their job was, but something of that nature. They walked to Jerusalem 100 miles and back for all the festivals and feasts. I like to say, Joseph, we see him also kind of like the other images I said, kind of, Joseph is carrying a flower. And yes, yes, very, very nice. I understand why this is made. I'm not criticizing it. I'm just saying that's not what Joseph looked like. Joseph could pick any one of you up and throw you over a wall in 2 seconds and not even think about it. He could take any one of us in a wrestling match and pin us to the ground in 2 seconds, and he'd win the match. These guys were tough men. They were not soft like us Westerners. So they're now chipping these rocks and working. At noon, the whistle blows. They get to take a break and drink some water, and they eat the fish and the bread that Mary sent them, and then back to work until the sun starts going down. And then they get their denarius, their silver denarius. This is what they got for pay. This one has a little gold thing, so you can use it as a necklace, but it's the coin. And this is what their day's wage was. We know that because Jesus said that this was a day's wage, a silver denarius. So they'd come home, each one of them in the palm of their hand, and they'd, if anything like my family, they just came home and gave it to Mary. But that's a day of work. Now, what did they talk about on the way back and forth to work? It's an hour walk in the morning and an hour walk in the back. I love to meditate. See, this is kind of Lectio Divina on the spot, Bible in a week kind of a thing over there. So what did Joseph and Jesus walk with all the other guys in Nazareth who were also going there to work, or did they just stay to themselves? And what did they talk about? Did Joseph teach Jesus, or did Jesus teach Joseph? He was there in the temple debating with the best professors in Jerusalem, and they were impressed with him. But also when you hear the parables of Jesus, I wonder if Joseph didn't teach him those parables. When you see Jesus, you see Joseph. How many of you do you have any characteristics of your father? I picked the right guy. I do too. My dad died 10 years ago, but I still, all the time, I say something and I'll say to my brother, oh, Dad used to say that all the time. Or even our grandkids, when my dad would see somebody he'd go like that. Like, I like, there, and even my grandkids do that. So that was, Papa did this. But Jesus lived with Joseph. Don't think that when you see Jesus, his idiosyncrasies, his personal quirks that he had, maybe some of the sayings that he had, or maybe Joseph is the one that told him about the log or the beam in your eye, and it was kind of a joke. It would be kind of a joke, Jesus, some of these guys they criticize and they tell people to get the splinter out of their own eye, but they have a big log in their eye. Jesus said, that's funny, Dad. That's a funny one, Dad. So when they came walking back and forth to work, I love to think about what their discussion were, or if they were the other guys too. I would assume they just went with everybody. They were fun guys to be with. You would have loved being with Joseph and Jesus. They weren't somber all the time. I think that they were a lot of fun to be with. They were truly human, and being spiritual is being truly human. It's becoming a Christian doesn't mean that you're no longer human, or that you're semi-angelic, or that you can't have fun anymore. I think that the good spiritual people can be the most joyful and the most fun conversationalists and joking and having fun together. At least that's my experience. So now they come back home. And they are, Mary sees them coming from over the hill. Now remember this, because it's going to be important tomorrow. Mary sees them coming over the hill, and she lives for these guys. So she immediately says, there they are. They're coming home. She rushes in, and she gets the mats laid out for bed tonight. She gets the food ready. She's making sure everything's all set. The prayer books are ready. They weren't books. They were scrolls. They would read from the scrolls. Whether families had scrolls or not, I think that they kind of did what we do at Mass. They heard the readings in the synagogue, and they would have to memorize it because they didn't have their own, because a scroll was very expensive. So it would just imagine if you came to Mass on Sunday and you didn't have your own Bible at home. So I see some people with their Bibles here, and you didn't have any hope of owning your own Bible because the Bible cost, all through the Middle Ages, one Bible cost 3 years' wages. It was the equivalent of the mortgage on your house. Because you had to have there was no paper and printing back then. It was animal skins, and you had to pay somebody to copy that whole. So when you went to Mass on Sunday, knowing that you don't have that book at home, and you don't have any hope of having one, how would you listen to the readings at Mass differently? You would do, and the antiphonal, singing back and forth, part of that was to memorize. So that you would memorize that scripture. And on the way, when you're walking back home, they would talk about those verses, try to remember them, because they didn't have it at home to go look it up in case they forgot what it said. Just think how you would listen at Mass differently if you And so I think Jesus and Joseph, they would have meditated on the scriptures too. Not kind of a funny thing, because Joseph and Mary teach Jesus how to pray. Well, he is the Word of God. We're going to teach you how to read the Word of God. But I am the Word of God, Mom. I am the living Word of God. But, it would have been an interesting raising God, raising the Son of God, because he had to learn in his human nature just like we do. So they would have their prayers again and go to bed. And, the dinner would be the same. Mary would have simple foods for them, the same kind that they would have maybe for breakfast, different kind of, a lot of grains and nuts and things, even there today when you go there, especially in Jericho, because Jericho, there's 2 oases in the Jordan Valley. It's very deserty down there by the Jordan River and the Dead Sea, but there's 2 places. There's Jericho and there's Ein Gev, and it's where they have big springs of water that come gushing out. So when you go to Jericho, even though it's 120 degrees down there in the summer, they have water and they have fertile things. And people come from all over Israel down to there because it's in the Palestinian West Bank and everything's like a tenth of the cost. You go down there and load your trunk up with fruits and vegetables, fresh, beautiful stuff that you can't get just anywhere in Israel. And so they would have these kind of fruits and nuts. They went through, Jesus and the Felly family walked through Jericho at least twice a year. They walked through Jericho. So when he tells the story of the Good Samaritan, which we just read about last Sunday, that they went through Jericho, Jesus knew exactly what he was talking about, because he went on that road at least twice a year, going up to Jerusalem for the festivals and back. And so now they would say their night prayers, and they would crash on the mats totally exhausted. And they would be worn out, because you can imagine 12 hours of working with hammers and chisels and rocks, and then an hour walk there and back. They're exhausted. Mary gets them ready for bed, and then they crash in bed. Now, a little bit about Mary's life during the day. What does she do? A woman's life back then was domestic. It was to take care of the house and the family. They made their own clothes. She had to make sure there was food. If you want to read what a very ingenious and entrepreneurial wife or woman does, you read Proverbs chapter 31, which is the wife that does all these things, spins her flax, and she does all of this, and what an asset she is to her husband, and she has her own business and does this. So Mary probably would be very much like that. And the clothes that they would wear would be made out of flax or out of wool, and probably Mary made it herself. And all day long was menial tasks. Jesus did poop his diapers, by the way. And it stunk just like any other baby's diapers. And I say that because with all of our grandkids, I know this, but we get the idea Jesus didn't do that, but he did. And they didn't have nappy diapers back then like we do today. I remember when our kids were first born, we went to Europe for a year to study. I did, and took 2 of our kids in diapers. And my wife said, "I'll go with you. I think this is a great adventure. We'll do this. We'll rent a chalet in the Swiss Alps." It was our Protestant author who I really liked, so we went and studied with him for a year in Switzerland in 1982 and 83. My wife said, "But it's your job to wash the diapers." And back then they had cotton diapers. Some of you may remember those days. And no matter what you did, you couldn't get that ammonia smell out of that completely. And so every night I had to fill the bathtub, hot water, Clorox bleach, scrub those diapers, wring them out, new water, and wring them out, hang them up to dry. That was my job. But they didn't even have those when they were, just imagine what they did with a baby for diapers. And but Jesus, he had to have his diapers changed all day long. And Mary, she's the mother of God. What in the world business does she have changing diapers? Come on, what kind of mundane life is this for the Immaculate Conception? They're going to be the Queen of Heaven, the Queen of the angels, and she's here cleaning stinky diapers. For 30 years she does this. Well, Jesus didn't wear diapers for the whole 30 years, but still, it was the whole life. So when I'm there with the group, I always say things like, when Mary had to go to the well every morning, she'd have to get that jug. Oh, I got these pictures for you. You can look at them afterwards, too. I'm having fun talking about all this. To me, this is fun. Okay, look, I have a book. My friend got it for me. It's somebody in Nazareth collected all of the very first photographs ever taken in Nazareth over 100 years ago, black and white photographs. And he took pictures of the girls getting water at the same well in Nazareth that Mary did. And you can look at them later, but that's the real Mary right there.
Oh, wow.
These are girls 100 years ago at the same well Mary was at getting water just like Mary got. And look at their toes. When you look at this, their feet. They don't look like the artwork that we see of Mary today at all. How much time do I have, sister? Am I talking to? I got to cut it? Yeah. Okay. Well, we're a third of the way done. That gives me a lot of material for tomorrow. But anyway, just two quick questions. Did Mary and the girls, men didn't go get water, only women did. No, men had more important things to do. They sit around and talk politics and things. It was the women that had, only women carried water all through history. Do you think the girls liked to go get the water? No. I think they did. Why? Social time. All the other girls are at the well getting water. There's no Facebook and Twitter and texting back then. If you want to know who likes who and whose mom was being grouchy and you go to the well, oh boy. And then they look up, they didn't have Apple Watches, and say, they look up and say, oh, look where the sun is. Mom's going to be furious. I better get back home. See you tonight. See you tonight. And then they'd go get the water. Well, I got more. We'll talk about it tomorrow and the next day. We got 5 more talks to give. So anyway, enjoyed talking with you all. This is going to be fun, and thanks for listening.